Hey there, Robert John Hadfield here with Audiomover, and we're the company that takes your old audio and videotapes and turns them into digital. And we were going through the studio a couple days ago, and I opened up a box and I found this old cassette tape of ELO out of the blue. This was their 7th studio album. Anyway, ELO was this great band. Jeff Lynne was the guy that wrote all the music. I think he produced all of it, and he was the singer, and he's this really, really well-known producer, songwriter, singer, and he's the guy that was the brains behind ELO. And so since what we do here in the Audiomover studio is we take people's old audio and videotapes and turn them into digital. We get people sending things in from churches that have their old sermons. We have things that are sent in from government agencies that have all of their recordings of hearings. I mean, just so many things get sent in from all over the country. People that have old cassette tapes, audio and videotapes that need to be turned into digital. We don't digitize this type of tape because this is a copyrighted tape from a band. But when I opened this up, I found something about this tape that was so cool because it was a problem that we have with many of the tapes that get sent into the studio for us to work on. And so since ELO is going on their final tour right now, and Jeff Lynne is kind of this somebody that I kind of like talking about because he had so many great things he did. The first time that I really became aware of Jeff Lynne, well, of course, everybody had heard the song Don't Bring Me Down. That was kind of popular when I was a little kid. But it was when the album and the movie Xanadu came out, because he produced, I think, half of that album, and he wrote the song Xanadu, and it was just he has this unique sound. And on this particular album, especially the song Turn to Stone, if you've never heard it before, well, you probably have heard it before, but you go look it up because it has this classic ELO Jeff Lynne kind of sound. And he just has this interesting way of putting music together, especially vocals. When you hear a Jeff Lynne production and you hear the vocals, you just know that it's him. And he worked with so many different bands over the years, and he was in one of the places that he showed up kind of after ELO was this thing called the Traveling Wilburys, which was Jeff Lynne, Roy Orbison, George Harrison, Tom Petty, and Bob Dylan. But it had this very Jeff Lynne sound to it, the way he produced the music. You could tell that it was his stuff. And also, he worked with George Harrison on the song Got My Mind Set on You. Again, when you listen to that stuff, you know it's Jeff Lynne producing it. And as a matter of fact, I think he also produced my favorite Roy Orbison song, which was I Drove All Night. Because you can hear elements of that where you go, that sounds like something that Jeff Lynne did. So anyway, when I found this in a box, and I thought we should make a video just talking about it again because ELO is on their last tour. And then I took it out and I found something that I was like, oh, this is perfect because this is, again, one of these typical issues we have when cassette tapes get sent into our studio. And it's the most common problem that we ever find with cassette tapes that get sent to us. And it's the pressure pad. And I'm going to move this. This blue tape is called leader tape. So if you were to forward this a little bit, eventually you'd see that there's the oxide tape right there, the brown stuff. But the leader tape is what's at the beginning and ending of every tape, and then it connects to the oxide. But underneath that tape, you'll see this little kind of piece of copper right there. And that copper is supposed to have on it a little piece of felt right there. But it's missing. It's fallen off. Because many, many tapes it was attached was kind of glued on there, and just over time it falls off. And if it falls off, your tape isn't going to sound very good, but you're not going to know why your tape doesn't sound very good. And I'll just kind of show you what it is or why that is. So I'll just use this to kind of give you an idea of how this is supposed to work. When you put a tape in a tape deck and you push play, there's this thing that's called a tape head, and it will, when you hit play, it'll push up into it like that, and then the tape spins. These reels spin, and then they drag the tape across the playhead, and the playhead is what then picks up the, the magnetic signal off the oxide tape, and that's where the sound comes from. But in order to get a solid connection between the tape and the playhead, they have this little piece of felt in there that kind of just gives this little bit of pressure back onto the playhead, so that the tape, as it moves through, it forces it to have a solid connection. And if we were to open up this tape, this is what you would see. This is what the pressure pad looks like on that little, you can see the, I'm going to move this again so you can kind of see. So you see in there the kind of this copper mount. Well, this is what it looks like inside if we were to take it out. But you'll see that that one inside doesn't have the pad, but the one I'm holding does. So it's supposed to look like that inside. And what happens is, just like any adhesive, over the years, it just breaks down, and eventually these things just fall off. Now, normally, when these things fall off, what we'll do is you'll just look inside the case and you'll just see it kind of sitting down in there. But in this case, when I opened it up, it wasn't in there. I'm not even sure where we got where this tape came from. It just happened to be in in a box that we had. And so, but it's such a common problem. And again, the tapes that get sent in here to the studio, we get them sent in from all over the country, from Canada, and we frequently, when we take the tapes out of these cases that people send them in, we'll notice that that's gone, and it just won't sound as good. Matter of fact, I've said several times in some of these videos, we'll get tapes from churches and government agencies, and we'll go and open the box that might have 200 tapes in it. And as we take the tapes out, we'll see down at the bottom of the box is just filled with these little pressure pads that have all fallen off. And so then what we have to do is go through the process of gluing them back on, or if we can, opening up the tape and actually replacing it with this full-size thing. But in this case, that's not practical, because this is glued together. This tape is. And so in order to open it up and actually replace the whole thing, you'd have to go through the process of breaking this apart. And it's just, you get mixed results when you start breaking these tapes open. And so in this, there's really no need to actually do that, because you can just you can take these pressure pads, literally just kind of peel them off of these old mounts, and then just put a little bit of glue in here, and then glue a new pressure pad onto the tape, or onto the mount right there, and then it'll work. And I'm just going to show you how we normally do that. And so we'll just use glue like this, and it's a very simple process. And if you have a tape that doesn't sound good, if you still play tapes, there's a good chance that that's happened, that the pressure pad has fallen off. And we get this tape, of course, was manufactured by a record company. Again, we don't digitize these kind of things because they have copyright restrictions. But you probably own some of these, and if you're watching this, there's a good chance you own one, because people do searches on these videos to see what the problem is, and we'd make these videos explaining how to fix them. Or maybe you've just owned one of these in ELO tape in the past and just were curious about it, but that was always in. Every single cassette tape you ever owned had one of those little pieces of kind of felt that are in there that helped the tape play correctly. And then when we get the tapes sent in from us, sent into us, then we end up having to replace these things. And so it's really a simple matter of, we just move this tape out of the way, like so. And then what we'll do is we'll take this glue, we'll just get a little dab, I use this old kind of screwdriver that we used to use for repairing. That's kind of seen better days. And then what we'll do is we just take this, we just put this little dab of glue right there on the pad. Having a little bit of a hard time getting it on there. Tiny little bit of glue, just like that. Not much more to it. And then we will take a pad that we've scavenged from another tape player. You can see it right there. Or from another cassette. And then we will just set it on like so. And then just let the glue set. And then that tape will work fine. And we'll just let it sit for, hour or so or whatever. I got a little bit of gunk in there in the process. And where we get these old pads is a lot of times we'll get, again, government agencies, churches that will send in literally thousands of tapes. And we did a project for a government agency once where we converted 115,000 cassette tapes, if you can believe it. And a lot of these organizations, we always send tapes back to you, by the way. If you send a tape in and we digitize it, we'll send the tape back to you unless you specifically tell us not to. And a lot of these organizations that have these, they send them, like we'll get a pallet of tapes. They don't want them back. Once we've digitized them, they just ask us to dispose of them. And what we'll do then is we will scavenge these pieces out of these old tapes, so that if you send a tape in and it's missing something like this and we can't find it, then we'll just take one of those old pieces. I mean, that's where this came from. We scavenged this out of somebody's project. And again, we don't do copyrighted tapes like this, but what most people send in to us, they might be recordings of interviews they did with their grandparents, a bar mitzvah, a piano recital. I mean, the stuff that we get, you just would be amazed at all the different kinds of things we get. And then also recordings of sermons, recordings of hearings that from courts and from different city councils, county. I mean, you'd be, again, when we started this business, I had no idea that there would be so many different things. It's kind of a funny story, because what we did is, I used to be a professional musician, and when I built my first recording studio back in 98, 99, I just took a bunch of old tapes that I had from recordings from band rehearsals and that kind of thing, from song ideas, and I just started digitizing them, because I had all the equipment to do it at the time. I had a nice interface and a nice tape deck, and I decided, I'm going to just digitize this stuff for myself. And then I thought, I wonder if anybody would pay money for a service like this. And so remember, this is back in 99, 2000. The internet was kind of as we know it today, in its infancy. And so I made this little web page that just said, hey, if you have old tapes, call me up, I can digitize them for you. And then we started just getting calls from around the country that people had old tapes. And then we got this, and this went on for a few months, and it was enough that I thought, I might even be able to pay my electrical bill with this. And it was funny, after doing this for about 6 months, I got this phone call from a guy in California, and he said, hey, I see on this website that you can convert tapes. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And he says, well, we have 1,000 tapes. I thought, 1,000 tapes? Why would you have 1,000 tapes? Who would have 1,000 tapes? I didn't have any idea what was out there at the time. And they were just church sermons. And he says, and we just wanted to get these things digitized so we can put them online for, the people in the congregation and what have you. And I thought, oh, okay, sure. I like, no problem. And I thought, how in the world am I going to do 1,000 tapes? I didn't know at the time. And then we figured out how to get that done in a timely manner. And then over the years, we just expanded and expanded and expanded. And we started getting calls from churches. Hey, we have 2,000 tapes, 5,000 tapes, on and on. And then it just grew and grew and grew from there. And so we've been doing this business now for 25 years. And so as a result, we've done this so many times. And that's how kind of the genesis of where Audiomover came from. And so anyway, so then again, we get so many of these things from churches and government agencies. We end up having a lot of these extra little parts and pieces from people that didn't want their tapes back. And so then we end up with all these little pieces so we can help you. So if you have old tapes, audio tapes, especially in this case, that you need digitized, or if you work with a church or something and you have boxes and boxes of these things, what you can do is just call us or go to audiomover.com and you can start an order there. Or if you have a lot of them, like a church does, if you happen to be one of those people, just call us because we can put together a custom quote for you and probably have some options that you hadn't thought of before to help you get all your stuff digitized. Anyway, that's it. So this is, again, ELO, great, one of the great bands. Jeff Lynne specifically, I think he actually early on, as I recall, he actually went into, when the Beatles were recording the White Album, he actually got to meet them or something during that time. And so the Beatles had a huge impact on Jeff Lynne. And then when he was later on in his career, he was able to go actually work with George Harrison and do some things. I think he even worked with Paul McCartney for a while. But Jeff Lynne is he was such an important part of the music industry, not just as a songwriter, because he had so many great tunes. I mean, like I said, this album specifically, this was one of their biggest selling albums. And Turn to Stone is just a classic example of what made ELO so great. And then over the years, he also wasn't just a songwriter and a singer, but he was a producer, because he was one that just got that sound, that Electric Light Orchestra sound, that ELO sound. And if you go listen to their stuff, there's just something about it that just has this really unique thing. And he's the guy that did it. And so if you have old tapes like this that were produced by a record company, and because a lot of these things were kind of cheap the way they were manufactured, and you might have bought them, some of the older people remember where you'd buy 10 tapes or records for a penny, and then you'd have to buy a few more over the next year or so. A lot of times these cassette tapes, that's how they were. They were put together so cheap. And then these pressure pads just fall off all the time. So anyway, I thought you'd find that kind of interesting, that little pad, that little piece of felt is so important. And you don't realize that no matter how good a shape the tape is in, if that pad's not there, it just isn't going to sound right. This one little thing can have such a massive impact on whether or not a tape sounds good. And so when tapes get sent into us to digitize, first thing we look for is we take that tape and make sure that pressure pad's there, because it's so frequently missing that's one of the first things we have to take care of to make sure that the tape, the recording, the digitized recording that we send back to you actually sounds good. Anyway, hope you find that interesting. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, etc. And anyway, hope you have a fantastic day.